When a humble pope decided to take a bus across Rome, no one expected the encounter that would change a young girl's life forever. It was a crisp Roman morning, and Pope Leo XIV stood by the window of his study, watching the city awaken below. The golden sunlight illuminated his face, highlighting the determined expression etched across his features. He had made his decision. Today he would visit the parish of San Lorenzo, not by papal motorcade, but by public bus. Your Holiness, with all due respect, this is unprecedented. Cardinal Vincenzo's voice broke the contemplative silence, concern evident in his tone. The security implications alone are manageable, Pope Leo finished, turning from the window with a gentle smile. Unlike his predecessors, Leo XIV had come from humble beginnings in a small Italian village. Even after ascending to the papacy, he never forgot the rhythm of ordinary life, something he felt slipping away with each day behind Vatican walls. The people don't need a pope who only sees them from behind bulletproof glass, he continued, his voice firm yet kind. They need to know the church walks among them, sits beside them, breathes the same air. The security director, a seasoned professional named Paolo, stepped forward. His posture remained respectful, but his expression conveyed decades of protective instinct. Holy Father, might I suggest a compromise? Perhaps a carefully arranged visit is precisely what I'm trying to avoid, Pope Leo interrupted, though his eyes crinkled warmly. When was the last time you rode the number 492 bus, Paolo? The security director blinked. I cannot recall, Your Holiness, nor can I, and that's exactly the point. A silence fell over the room as the small group of Vatican officials exchanged glances. Pope Leo watched them, noting their discomfort with quiet amusement. In the 3 years since his election, they had grown accustomed to his unorthodox approaches. But this request pushed boundaries even for him. The parish is celebrating its 400th anniversary, he reminded them softly. I want to arrive as the people arrive, not in a procession, but as one among many. Cardinal Vincenzo sighed, recognizing the familiar resolute tone. If Your Holiness insists, we will make arrangements. But security must be present but discreet, Pope Leo agreed, nodding. I understand the concerns, old friend, but sometimes we must trade perfect safety for perfect connection. As the officials reluctantly dispersed to prepare, Pope Leo turned back to the window. Below, he could see the tiny figures of Romans beginning their day, unaware that their pontiff would soon be among them, waiting at a bus stop like anyone else. In the security briefing room, early morning light cast long shadows across the polished conference table. Marco Rossi, head of Vatican security for 15 years, paced the floor while his team presented a litany of potential disasters. Pope Leo sat calmly at the head of the table, his simple white cassock stark against the dark wood, listening patiently, as scenarios ranging from unlikely to apocalyptic filled the air. Crowds could form spontaneously, warned Stefano, the tactical specialist. Recognition in confined spaces creates unpredictable variables. Not to mention extremist threats, added Lucia, intelligence coordinator. We've monitored 3 separate groups with anti-Catholic rhetoric in the past month alone. Marco stopped pacing and faced Pope Leo directly. Holy Father, I must be absolutely clear. We cannot guarantee your safety in a standard public bus setting. The Pope folded his hands gently. I appreciate your candor, Marco, but I'm not asking for guarantees, only possibilities. A moment of tense silence filled the room before the Pope continued, his voice thoughtful but firm. Consider this. When I was a parish priest in Brescia, I rode the bus every day. No security, no protocols, just a priest among his people. With all respect, Marco countered, you weren't the head of the Catholic Church then. Leo's eyes twinkled. God doesn't see the difference, even if our security protocols do. One of the younger aides suppressed a smile. Marco noticed and shot him a warning glance before turning back to the Pope. "If I may propose a compromise," Marco said, unfolding a map of Rome. 4 plainclothes agents on the bus itself, 2 advanced team members at each stop along the route. The parish notified only 20 minutes before arrival. Pope Leo considered this, stroking his silver-streaked beard. "And my appearance?" "Simplified," Marco replied. "The white zucchetto, but a dark suit jacket over your clerical shirt. Identifiable to those looking closely, but not immediately obvious to a casual observer. No ceremonial cross," Marco hesitated. "A small one, underneath the jacket." The Pope nodded slowly. "And how many bulletproof SUVs will be trailing the bus?" "Just one," Marco answered, then added reluctantly, "at a discreet distance." Pope Leo smiled. "Progress, then." An aide approached with a simple black jacket. The Pope tried it on over his white clerical shirt, examining his reflection in the glass wall of the conference room. "I look like an ordinary priest," he observed with satisfaction. "That's rather the point, Your Holiness," Marco said, unable to entirely hide his continued concern. "It's perfect," Pope Leo declared, turning to face the room. "I believe we have our compromise, gentlemen." Marco gave a respectful nod, though his furrowed brow betrayed his lingering reservations. "We depart in 30 minutes. God willing, this will be the most uneventful bus ride in papal history." "God willing," echoed the Pope with a serene smile. "It will be exactly the opposite." The bus stop on Via della Conciliazione stood unassumingly beneath the shadow of St. Peter's Basilica, a simple metal bench and schedule board serving Romans and tourists alike. Pope Leo arrived with Marco and 2 plainclothes security agents, their careful spacing creating an illusion of 4 unconnected travelers rather than a papal security detail. 7 minutes until the next 492, Marco murmured, checking his watch. While pretending to examine the schedule, Pope Leo nodded almost imperceptibly, his attention already drawn to his fellow waiting passengers. A young mother bounced a fussing infant while checking her phone, dark circles beneath her eyes suggesting sleepless nights. An elderly man clutched a plastic bag of medications, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he counted small coins. 2 teenagers shared earbuds, laughing at something on a cracked phone screen, their school uniforms slightly worn but meticulously clean. Ordinary miracles, the Pope thought, observing how the mother somehow managed to soothe her baby with one arm while responding to messages with the other, a small ballet of maternal multitasking that would never make headlines but represented its own kind of daily heroism. A slight breeze carried the scents of the city, vehicle exhaust, fresh bread from a nearby bakery, and the earthy perfume of spring flowers in window boxes. Pope Leo breathed deeply, realizing how sterile the filtered air of the papal apartments had become to him. A businessman hurried past, speaking rapidly into his phone about deadlines and projections, his eyes never leaving the pavement. He brushed past the elderly man, causing him to stumble slightly. Pope Leo instinctively stepped forward to steady him, their eyes meeting briefly. "Grazie, padre," the man said, noticing the white collar beneath Leo's jacket. "Di niente," the Pope replied, softly. The man squinted, a flash of uncertainty crossing his face as he studied Leo's features. Before recognition could fully dawn, Marco smoothly inserted himself between them, asking the elderly man about the bus schedule with practiced casualness. Pope Leo turned away, suppressing a smile at Marco's efficient intervention. His gaze fell on a young girl approaching the stop, perhaps 11 or 12 years old, carrying a small backpack that seemed too heavy for her slight frame. She walked with purpose, her eyes holding a seriousness that seemed out of place on such a young face. The distant rumble of an approaching bus drew everyone's attention. The mother adjusted her baby's blanket. The elderly man gripped his bag tighter, and the teenagers unplugged their shared earbuds. Marco made eye contact with his agents, a silent confirmation passing between them. As the bus lumbered toward them, Pope Leo watched the young girl shift her backpack, wincing slightly. Something about her, perhaps the determined set of her small shoulders or the adult-like responsibility in her eyes, tugged at his heart, a gentle reminder of why he had insisted on this journey in the first place. Elena Rossi woke before her, alarm as she did most mornings. The pale dawn light filtered through the thin curtains of the apartment on Via Tiburtina, casting soft shadows across the cramped bedroom she shared with her mother. She slipped quietly from beneath the faded quilt, careful not to disturb Sophia, who had finally fallen asleep just 3 hours ago after another night of painful coughing. The small two-room apartment bore the dignified marks of a family that had once known better circumstances. A few quality pieces of furniture inherited from grandparents, a small collection of well-read books, and a single silver picture frame containing a photograph of Elena's father in his military uniform. He had been gone for 5 years now, deployed to a peacekeeping mission from which he never returned. Elena moved silently through her morning routine with the efficiency of someone who had been managing a household far too young. At 12, she could prepare espresso properly, organize medications by schedule, and navigate Rome's bus system with the confidence of a seasoned commuter. Elena, her mother's voice, weak but warm, came from the bedroom doorway. Sophia leaned against the frame, her once vibrant beauty now shadowed by illness, her nightgown hanging loosely on her thin frame. "Mama, you should be resting," Elena scolded, gently, guiding her mother to the small kitchen table. "I wanted to see you before you left." Sophia's eyes, the same deep brown as Elena's, filled with a familiar mixture of pride and regret. "I've written down exactly what the pharmacist should give you. Dr. Bianchi adjusted the dosage yesterday." Elena nodded, tucking the prescription note into her backpack alongside the small envelope containing carefully counted euros, just enough for the medicine with nothing to spare. "I've made your tea and toast," Elena said, placing the simple breakfast before her mother. "There's soup from Signora Conti in the refrigerator for lunch. Just heat it gently." She demonstrated the low setting on the stove, though they had been through this ritual dozens of times before. Sophia caught her daughter's hand. "When did you become the mother, piccola mia?" Elena smiled, though her eyes held a seriousness no child should possess. "I'll be back by noon. Don't forget to rest. Don't forget to drink water. Don't forget to take the blue pill at 10, Sophia finished with a sad smile. "I remember," Elena kissed her mother's forehead, feeling the slight fever that never completely disappeared. "I'll be quick." At the door, Elena checked her appearance in the small mirror, neat braided hair, clean but mended school uniform, the too heavy backpack containing schoolbooks she would study on the bus. For a moment, she allowed herself to see the reflection as others might, not the household manager or the medicine fetcher, but simply a young girl with serious eyes and shoulders already squared against adult burdens. "The 492 comes at 7:45, she reminded herself, closing the apartment door quietly behind her. As she descended the worn staircase, she mentally rehearsed the fastest route to the pharmacy and back, aware that every minute away from home carried worry about what might happen in her absence. The 492 bus arrived with a mechanical wheeze, already crowded from previous stops. Pope Leo boarded behind Marco, who had positioned himself to create a small buffer of space. The familiar smell of a public bus, a mixture of cologne, coffee, and the collective morning, brought an unexpected wave of nostalgia. How many years had it been since he'd experienced this most ordinary of Roman rituals? The vehicle lurched forward, causing passengers to sway in unison like reeds in a breeze. Leo gripped a handrail, conscious of Marco's vigilant presence beside him. 2 other security agents had boarded separately, standing at strategic points that allowed them to survey the entire bus while appearing to be ordinary commuters. A businessman pressed against Leo's side, absent-mindedly scrolling through his phone. A university student clutched textbooks to her chest, mouthing what appeared to be memorized formulas. An elderly woman sat rigidly in a priority seat, her weathered hands gripping a worn rosary, a small private devotion amid the public. A chaos. At the next stop, more passengers squeezed in, among them Elena, her serious eyes scanning for space. She slipped through the press of bodies with practiced ease, finding a narrow spot near the center of the bus, where she could brace herself against a vertical pole. Pope Leo noticed how she carefully adjusted her backpack, keeping it close against her chest rather than letting it bump against others. The morning light filtered through smudged windows, casting everyone in a soft golden glow that seemed almost divine in its democratic illumination. Businessman and laborer, student and retiree, pontiff and child, all bathed in the same light. A sudden stop sent passengers lurching forward. A man in work clothes stumbled, accidentally stepping on a woman's foot. "Mi dispiace," he muttered. The woman glared but said nothing, retreating further into the private world of her headphones. Pope Leo observed these small human dramas with quiet attention. How different this was from the carefully orchestrated interactions of Vatican life, where every word was measured, every gesture analyzed. Here was humanity unfiltered, sometimes harsh, sometimes kind, but always authentic. The bus turned a corner sharply, and Elena was momentarily pressed toward where Leo stood. For a brief instant, their eyes met, hers dark and serious, his warm and observant. Something in her expression struck him, a maturity beyond her years, a gravity that seemed out of place on such a young face. Then the bus straightened its course, and the moment passed as quickly as it had come. Marco noticed the exchange and shifted slightly closer to the Pope, his training making him alert to any interaction. But Leo placed a subtle, calming hand on his security chief's arm. This was exactly what he had come for. Not to be protected from the world, but to be immersed in it. As the bus lumbered through morning traffic, Pope Leo and Elena remained just feet apart, two souls carrying very different responsibilities, moving toward an encounter neither could anticipate. The bus lurched over a pothole, sending a collective groan through the standing passengers. Pope Leo shifted his weight, his knee, an old injury from his seminary football days, aching slightly. Despite Marco's discreet offer earlier to find him a seat, Leo had insisted on standing. This journey was about experiencing life as his. Flock did, not receiving special treatment. 3 stops had passed, and the bus had only grown more crowded. Bodies pressed together in the confined space, most passengers retreating into private worlds behind phones or headphones. The morning sun now streamed directly through the windows, turning the interior uncomfortably warm. Leo dabbed discreetly at his forehead with a handkerchief, the black jacket that concealed his clerical status beginning to feel heavy. Elena stood nearby, her small frame wedged between 2 larger adults. Despite the crush, she maintained a bubble of dignity, holding her backpack close and occasionally glancing at her watch. The bus hit another bump, and Leo winced involuntarily as his weight landed on his bad knee. The subtle reaction didn't escape. Elena's notice. Her observant eyes took in the older man's discomfort, the slight grimace, the way he shifted to favor his right leg, the lines of fatigue beginning to show on his kind face. She glanced around the bus, noting how everyone seemed absorbed in their own concerns. A woman applying makeup, a man nodding off against the window, teenagers taking selfies. A memory surfaced in Elena's mind, her mother's voice, weakened by illness but firm with conviction. Kindness costs nothing, piccola mia, but its absence costs everything. It was one of Sophia's frequent reminders, usually accompanied by stories of her own mother's generosity, despite their family's humble circumstances. Decision made, Elena slipped from her place, maneuvering through the press of bodies until she reached the area where several seats were occupied by passengers who had boarded before her. She had been standing for only 3 stops. Some of these people had been sitting since the beginning of the route. "Scusi," she said softly to a middle-aged woman engrossed in her phone. The woman looked up, startled. "Would you mind if this gentleman takes your seat? I think his leg is hurting him." The woman blinked, glancing between Elena and Pope Leo. For a moment it seemed she might refuse, but something in the girl's earnest expression made her reconsider. With a small nod and the faintest smile of admiration, she gathered her belongings and stood. Elena turned to Pope Leo, who had watched the exchange with surprise. "Signore," she said, gesturing to the newly vacated seat. "Please sit. You seem to be in pain." Marco, standing nearby, stiffened at this unexpected development. His training hadn't prepared him for the protocol of a child offering the Pope a bus seat. Leo met his security chief's concerned gaze and gave an almost imperceptible nod of reassurance. "Thank you, young lady," Pope Leo said gently to Elena, genuinely touched by her simple act of kindness. "That's very considerate of you." As he moved toward the offered seat, their eyes met again, the Pope and the girl, neither aware of how this small moment of compassion would soon transform both their lives. Pope Leo settled into the seat, relief washing over his face as the weight lifted from his knee. Elena stood before him, one hand gripping the overhead rail, swaying slightly with the motion of the bus. Marco positioned himself nearby, his attention divided between scanning the other passengers and monitoring this unexpected interaction. "That was very kind of you," Leo said, looking up at Elena. "Most people wouldn't have noticed." She shrugged with the honest simplicity of youth. "My mother says we should always offer seats to older people. She says it's respect." A slight blush colored her cheeks. "Not that you're very old, signore," Leo chuckled softly. "Old enough that my knee appreciates your thoughtfulness." He studied her school uniform, clean but showing signs of careful mending. "Are you on your way to school?" "After," Elena replied, her voice dropping slightly. "First I need to go to the pharmacy. My mother needs her medicine." Something in her tone carried the weight of routine. This wasn't an occasional errand, but a regular responsibility. Leo nodded, recognizing the burden of duty in her young eyes. "That's a big responsibility for someone your age." "I'm 12, she answered with a hint of pride. "I've been getting Mama's medicine for almost 2 years. Now." The bus slowed for another stop. Through the window, Leo could see the dome of St. Peter's in the distance, a reminder of the life he had temporarily stepped away from. He caught Marco's subtle glance, a silent question about whether this conversation was wise, but something about the girl's dignified self-reliance drew him in, reminding him of the parish children he had once taught as a young priest. "And your father?" Leo asked gently. "Does he work early?" Elena's gaze dropped momentarily to the floor of the bus. "He was a soldier. He died when I was 7. "I'm very sorry," Leo said, genuine compassion in his voice. His fingers, instinctively, moved to where his pectoral cross would normally rest, now hidden beneath his jacket. She nodded in acknowledgement, her expression suggesting this was a grief she had learned to carry. "It's just Mama and me now. She has—" Elena hesitated, searching for the right word. "Lung problems. Sometimes she can't breathe well." Leo noticed how she squared her small shoulders when speaking of her mother's illness, a child bearing an adult's concerns with quiet dignity. A few other passengers had begun to notice their conversation, some glancing curiously at the older man in the dark jacket, speaking so intently with the schoolgirl. "And you take care of her," Leo observed, not as a question but a recognition. "Someone has to," Elena replied simply. Then, with unexpected brightness, she added, "Are you a priest? I can see your collar a little bit." The question hung in the air between them. Marco shifted closer, alert to this critical juncture. Pope Leo felt the familiar tension between openness and discretion, between his identity and his role. But looking into Elena's honest, expectant face, he saw something that transcended protocol, an opportunity for genuine human connection. "Yes," he answered softly. "I am." The bus wound its way through narrow streets lined with ancient buildings. The morning sun, casting long shadows across cobblestones, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Elena's face brightened at Pope Leo's admission. "My mother likes priests," she said. "Before she got too sick, we went to Mass every Sunday at San Lorenzo. She said prayers help, even when medicine doesn't." Leo nodded thoughtfully. "San Lorenzo? That's where I'm headed today." "It's our parish," Elena explained. "We live just 2 streets away, in the old apartment building with the green shutters. Our flat is small, but Mama says it's enough." The simplicity of her statement touched something deep within Leo. How often had he spoken about the virtue of modest living from the grandeur of the Vatican? "And the medicine you're getting today," he asked gently, "does it help your mother?" Elena's expression grew serious, her young face momentarily bearing the weight of adult concerns. "Sometimes. The doctors say her lungs won't get better, but the medicine helps her breathe easier." She lowered her voice slightly. "It's expensive. Last month we couldn't pay the electricity bill because Mama needed extra treatments." Marco, standing nearby, caught the Pope's eye with a subtle glance, a silent acknowledgement of the gravity of what they were witnessing. Other passengers continued their morning routines, unaware that their ordinary bus journey had become an unexpected confessional. "What about other family?" Leo asked. "Grandparents or aunts who might help?" Elena shook her head. "Nonna died last year. She used to help us a lot." She adjusted her backpack, a small gesture that seemed to help her maintain composure. "Mama sells embroidery when she feels strong enough. She's very good. She made altar cloths for San Lorenzo before she got sick." The bus slowed for another stop, and Leo noticed Elena checking the street signs visible through the window. Her stop must be approaching. The realization brought an unexpected sense of urgency. This brief window into her life was closing, and he felt the inadequacy of any response he might offer. As vicar of Christ, he presided over vast resources, met with world leaders, and addressed millions. Yet here, faced with one child's quiet suffering, what could he truly do? The theological explanations for suffering that he had studied and taught seemed hollow in the face of Elena's matter-of-fact courage. "My mother always says God sends help in unexpected ways," Elena continued, unaware of Leo's internal struggle. "Like today, finding a seat for you." She smiled slightly. "Maybe he sent you to talk to me too. Sometimes the bus rides feel long when I'm worried about Mama." The simple faith in her statement struck Leo with unexpected force. In this child's mind, their meeting wasn't random. It was providence. The notion resonated with something fundamental in his own beliefs, something that sometimes became obscured amid the complexities of his office. As the bus approached the next stop, Elena straightened. "This is where I get off for the pharmacy." Pope Leo felt the weight of decision pressing upon him. This brief encounter was ending, but something told him it shouldn't end here. Not yet. The bus decelerated as it approached Elena's stop, the brakes emitting a familiar squeal. Pope Leo felt a quiet urgency rising within him, a certainty that this encounter held purpose beyond chance. His hand moved to his pocket, fingers brushing against the small object he always carried. A gesture. So habitual he often forgot its presence. "Before you go," he said, his voice gentle but carrying unexpected authority. Several nearby passengers glanced up, something in his tone commanding attention. An elderly woman sitting across the aisle looked more closely at Leo, her eyes widening in sudden recognition. She nudged her companion, whispering something that made the other woman turn and stare. A ripple of awareness began to spread through the bus, subtle at first, then gathering momentum like a wave. "Hey, il Papa," someone whispered. "It's the Pope." Marco stepped closer, his posture shifting to heightened alertness as he assessed the changing situation. But the passengers' reactions weren't chaotic or intrusive. Instead, a reverent hush descended, creating an unexpected bubble of privacy amidst the public space. Elena, focused on gathering her backpack, remained oblivious to the transformation occurring around her. "Yes, Father," she asked, using the respectful address for any priest. Leo reached into his pocket and withdrew a small silver medal, oval-shaped and worn smooth at the edges from decades of handling. On one side was an image of Christ, with arms outstretched in blessing. On the other, the papal insignia encircled by 12 stars. The medal had been passed to him by his predecessor, who had received it from the Pope before him, a tradition extending back centuries. "This medal is very special," Leo explained, his voice low enough that only Elena could hear clearly. "It carries a blessing for healing and protection. Popes have carried it for generations, especially when visiting the sick." Elena's eyes widened as she looked at the medal gleaming in his palm. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I want you to have it," Leo continued, "for your mother." A woman several seats away pressed her hand to her heart, tears forming in her eyes as she witnessed the exchange. A businessman discreetly removed his hat. The ordinary morning commute had transformed into something approaching sacred. "But if it belongs to priests," Elena began hesitantly. "I couldn't—" "It doesn't belong to priests," Leo corrected gently. "It belongs to those who need God's comfort." He held it out to her. "Sometimes faith provides what medicine cannot." Elena slowly extended her hand, accepting the medal with the solemn care of someone receiving a precious gift. As their hands briefly touched in the exchange, Pope Leo felt an unexpected certainty. This small action mattered more than many of his grand papal gestures. The bus lurched to a stop. "Via del Pineto," announced the automated system. "That's my stop," Elena said, carefully placing the medal in her uniform pocket. "Thank you, Father." She turned toward the door, still unaware of the identity of the kind priest who had entrusted her with such a gift. As she stepped toward the exit, an older man rose from his seat and bowed slightly to Pope Leo, making a discreet sign of the cross. The gesture caught Elena's attention, causing her to turn back with a questioning glance. In that pivotal moment, something in the respectful demeanor of the passengers, the protective stance of Marco, and the dignified bearing of the priest she had been speaking with finally connected in Elena's mind. Elena stood frozen at the bus doors as they hissed open, her hand instinctively moving to the pocket where she'd placed the medal. The respectful silence that had fallen over the bus passengers finally registered in her consciousness. She turned back slowly, her eyes widening as she took in the scene with new understanding. The deferential postures, the discreet signs of the cross, the protective stance of the men she now recognized as security personnel. Her gaze returned to the kind-faced man she had offered her seat to, seeing him truly for the first time. The white collar partially visible beneath his jacket. The familiar features she had seen countless times on television and in newspapers. The gentle eyes that had listened so attentively to her troubles. She whispered, her voice trailing off as the full realization dawned. Blood drained from her face, leaving her complexion ashen. Her small hand trembled as she pulled the medal from her pocket, examining it with new understanding. Pope Leo nodded gently, his eyes warm with compassion. "Yes, child." Elena's knees weakened, and for a moment it seemed she might collapse. Marco moved forward swiftly but discreetly, positioning himself to support her if necessary. The bus driver, now aware of the extraordinary passenger, made no move to close the doors or continue the route. The medal, Elena said, her voice barely audible. With trembling fingers, she turned it over, revealing the papal insignia and the 12 surrounding stars. Suddenly, she gasped, her eyes growing impossibly wider. The 12 stars. Pope Leo leaned forward slightly, curious at her specific reaction to that detail. My nonna, Elena continued, her voice breaking with emotion. She always told stories about a medal just like this. She said our family had one generations ago, blessed by a pope during a great illness in Rome. Tears filled her eyes. She said it was lost during the war when they had to flee their home. She described it exactly like this: Christ on one side, and 12 stars circling the papal seal on the other. The coincidence, or perhaps something more than coincidence, hung in the air between them. Pope Leo felt a chill of recognition travel up his spine. The medal's provenance was well documented in Vatican records, commissioned during a tuberculosis epidemic in the 1800s, blessed by Pope Pius IX and given to families of the gravely ill. Could this child's family have been among those recipients? Generations ago, your grandmother, Leo asked softly. What was her family name before marriage? Bianchi, Elena replied. From the Trastevere district. A murmur rippled through the watching passengers. An elderly woman made the sign of the cross, whispering, Miracolo, under her breath. Pope Leo reached out, gently closing Elena's fingers around the medal. Then perhaps this medal is finding its way home, he said, his voice steady despite his own astonishment. Elena looked down at her closed hand, then back to the Pope's face. The color had not returned to her cheeks, and her expression held a mixture of awe and disbelief. Holy Father, she whispered, the formal address coming naturally now. Why were you on this bus? Why did you speak to me? The bus remained motionless, suspended in a moment that seemed to exist outside ordinary time. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the unlikely tableau. A pope in simple clothes, a pale-faced schoolgirl clutching an ancient medal, and a collection of everyday Romans witnessing something they would recount for the rest of their lives. Time seemed to hover in the doorway of the bus, suspended between moments like dust particles in the morning light. The driver had turned off the engine, recognizing the significance of what was unfolding. Passengers remained in reverent silence, witnesses to something extraordinary occurring in the most ordinary of settings. Why were you on this bus? Why? Did you speak to me? Elena's questions hung in the air between them. Pope Leo's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. I wanted to visit San Lorenzo, as the people do, not as a pope with processions and fanfare, but as a fellow pilgrim. He gestured to the medal in her hand. And now I understand why. Elena traced the outline of the 12 stars with her finger. Nonna said it was blessed specifically for healing. Yes, Pope Leo nodded. During the tuberculosis epidemic of 1869, Pope Pius IX commissioned 100 silver medals to be blessed and distributed to families with gravely ill members. His voice took on the measured cadence of a historian sharing a treasured story. The medals bore a special blessing, not just for physical healing, but for the strength to endure suffering with dignity. A woman nearby crossed herself, whispering a prayer. The reverence in the bus had transformed it from public transport to something approaching a sacred space. Each medal was given to a family suffering from illness, Leo continued. The Vatican archives record which families received them. The Bianchi family of Trastevere was among them. He paused, the weight of the connection settling between them. Their daughter had fallen ill with tuberculosis. The medal was given to bring comfort and hope. Elena's eyes widened. My nonna told me her grandmother survived when others didn't. She always said it was a miracle. Faith and medicine together can work wonders, Leo said gently. The medal was passed down through generations until the war, Elena finished. Nonna said they had to flee Rome in 1943. They left everything, Behind! Her voice grew quieter. She said losing the medal was like losing their protection. Marco discreetly checked his watch, aware that the bus schedule had been thoroughly disrupted. A small crowd had begun to gather outside, curious about why the bus remained stationary with its doors open. Pope Leo noticed Elena's troubled expression. "What is it, child?" "Mama," she whispered. She prayed for a sign. Tears welled in her eyes. "Last night, when she couldn't breathe well, she told me she had prayed to Nonna's Madonna for a sign that she wouldn't leave me alone." A hush fell over the passengers at this intimacy shared so openly. The elderly woman who had first recognized the Pope dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Leo reached out, gently placing his hand over Elena's, still clutching the medal. "The medal doesn't contain magic, Elena, but it carries faith. The faith of your ancestors, the prayers of those who blessed it, and now your own faith too." The bus driver, reluctant to interrupt but aware of his responsibilities, cleared his throat softly. "Holiness," he said with deep respect, "there are other passengers waiting." Leo nodded in understanding. The moment, however extraordinary, couldn't suspend time indefinitely. He turned back to Elena, his expression solemn yet hopeful. "Take the medal to your mother," he said softly. "Tell her its story, your family's story, and know that I will be praying for her at San Lorenzo today." Elena stood at the threshold, one foot on the bus and one foot in the outside world, clutching a piece of her family's history that had somehow found its way back to her through the most unlikely of encounters. Elena raced home, the medal secure in her pocket. She found her mother at the kitchen table and placed the silver token in her palm. "Look," she whispered, describing her encounter on the bus. Sophia traced the 12 stars with trembling fingers. "Pope Leo gave you this?" she asked, tears welling. "Last night I prayed for a sign." Later, Pope Leo stood at his window, watching Rome's lights emerge. He recalled seeing them at San Lorenzo, Elena beside her mother's wheelchair, Sophia wearing the medal proudly. "Have the medical office contact them," he instructed Marco quietly, then began writing a letter, not from pontiff to subject, but from one traveller to another.